Greetings, fellow YouTubers. I am Jon, also known as Mirandur. If you are like me, your desk might be a little crowded when you're working, and there's no place to put your headphones. After a bit of searching, I was not satisfied with any of the headphone holders I found. There were they took up too much space on the desk, actually. I did, however, find a clampable holder by Phil Barringer on Thingiverse. I will put the link in the description. That clamp or that headphone holder actually clamps to a shelf or the desk itself. There were some things about the design I wasn't completely satisfied with, so I went ahead and designed my own from scratch. After a few failures, like this one that cracked, which also was a problem with the one by Phil Barringer, I went through a few iterations and prototypes, and I ended up with this. I will show you how I made this in just a few seconds. I've started to try using Autodesk Fusion 360 when modeling, especially for 3D prints. This is a software that Autodesk gives out for free to startup companies and hobbyists. You have to register at the Autodesk site and log on to Fusion 360 after you've installed it. But as long as you use it as a hobby, or you are a startup company that makes less than $100,000 a year, you are able to use it for free. You just have to re-register every year. I haven't learned that much about software yet, but I have learned a few tricks. I won't go into any detail now. There are plenty of tutorials around on YouTube for that, but I will show you a bit about how I made this model. This down here is the timeline. It shows all the operations that has been done to the model. In order to make the model, we start out with a sketch. In this case, I made a general outline of how I want it to look in the end. I used a lot of these dimensions. These are hard dimensions. I can go in and I can tell the software that I want a different dimension, and it will change the model accordingly, and change the sketch accordingly. Because this is parametric, if I stop the sketch, it will update the model to look to the new dimension I just put in there. Let's change that back. You can go into the sketch again and put this back to where it was. And then we stop sketch. And then all the operations that has been done in the model up to will be done again out from that new sketch. The model I have made was a lot of work, literally. And I've done it like again and again and again and again until I got a form that I was satisfied with, which means that this timeline is a mess. And if I go in and change something, I might not be able to recover what I did. So when modeling in Fusion 360, I would recommend that you have a clear image in your mind about what you want to do. This isn't a software where you can go in and just start modeling and see what comes out in the other end. You have to plan a bit, or you have to start over again. You can use the timeline slider and slide down a few operations and slide back to what you have before. And you can add a bit more and more. And then when you got to a reasonable point, you can start a new operation. And that will be inserted where this timeline slider is. When you are done with the model, you have here on the left side, you have all the bodies that is part of this scene or this model, and all the sketches that has been used to make this shape. When you're done with it, we have a make button here that can be used to 3D print. Normally, this is used to send it to a 3D print utility, so directly through a 3D print software. But we can uncheck this check mark, and we can then choose the model we want to export. We can only choose one at a time. I need to export these two as separate entities. And then we click OK, and we get a window that asks us where to save it. I've already saved several versions of it, like here, like as you see. So I won't save this again. But we do end up with the model that can be an STL file that we can import into Simplify 3D, Cura, or whatever you use, and to 3D print. The only thing that one has to be careful about is that when you start sketching, we start a new sketch. Let me just do that now. We can choose which plane we want to model on. When I first made this model, it was one of the first ones I made. I used these bottom plane to model on. And what I realized later was that when I exported the STL and put it into Simplify 3D, the model was on its side. In order for it to be on the right orientation in Simplify 3D and other printing software, you actually had to use this, the back plane. You can see in the cube here on top, which is the front, top, right, and the back is back here. And in order to, when you start sketching and modeling, use the back plane as the origin. That is considered down in Simplify 3D and other 3D modeling tools like Thinkercad, for example. Now that we have our STL, we are ready to print it. I use Simplify 3D. Now, here you can see that the model of the body is on its side compared to what it was here in Fusion 360. In order to change the orientation, we can double click on the model itself, and we get up this movement pane, or transforming pane actually. And here in change rotation, we can change it. This one is twisted along the x-axis. So if we change it, you can see it start to tilt forwards. We want this to be tilted 90 degrees. And we center and arrange. It will be brought up onto the platform and be ready for printing. This model requires support, especially on this tab here. This will be printing in midair if we don't do anything. So on the button on the right here gives us the support generation window. By generating automatic supports, we get a lot of supports. Most of these we can keep. Like these are not really necessary. So I can remove them one by one by clicking on Remove Existing Support. Or I can clear all support and add new support structures. I can add them manually. I find it easier for automatic support to do its job and then just remove what I don't need, even though it can take a bit of time. What I've found is that the part here, this part needs support and this one needs support. we don't really need support here at this curve, and we don't really need much inside. So we can remove on each side. In the middle, I would put support because there are a bit of overhang here. You can try without it. It won't really matter much, and it is a bit difficult to remove. This one as well. It isn't really needed, but it depends on your 3D printer how well it can do overhangs. So it might be better to just leave it. These ones we also don't need. Okay, so now we're done. Now we need to change our settings. My big box is a dual printer, but I think I will use the right extruder only here, and I will use PLA. But I will use quite a bit more infill because this part needs to be strong. So I think I'll put it at 35%. And I will be using the right extruder. I will be using 4 top layers, 4 bottom layers, and 4 outline or perimeter shells. I will be using a raft because I have a bit of adhesion problems on my 3D printer, which means that it has been scarred on the build tag surface. So I use a raft to even out the surface it's printing on as well. For infill, I use a fast honeycomb and a rectilinear external fill pattern. The external fill pattern is what will shape it will have on the top and the bottom. The fast honeycomb will look like, well, a honeycomb, and that will be inside. Honeycomb is a bit more, well, it saves a bit more filament than if using a grid or any of the other types. Support, we need support, so we need to generate support material, and all of this needs to be done with the right extruder. I won't be using the left extruder at all. For temperature, I use 60 degrees on the heated bed because I have the build tag, which means that the temperature on the top of the bed isn't really 60, it's lower. And I found that 60 degrees, even with PLA, actually makes it adhere to the bed better. On the right extruder, I use several settings actually. You can use this with adding set points here. The first layer is actually the lowest layer on the raft itself. The raft will be 6 layers tall. So I use 225 degrees C on the first layer, 215 degrees on the next layer, and 205 degrees when the raft is done and all the way up. For the filament, I have started to use the FlashForge PLA. It is a cheap filament and I can get it on a local store. So I've been using that. When it comes to cooling, I've put it at 0 degrees at the first layer to help it adhere better and not cool down too fast, and 50% from there up, from the second layer up. I use 43 millimeters a second, which I found is more or less the limit to how fast this printer can go without leaving too much imperfections. Because if it goes any faster than that, there is a hybrid head and a direct drive on one of the nozzles. That makes the head very heavy, which means that there is a bit of backlash when you're changing direction. You can see that in the print. And I found that about 33 millimeters a second is about as fast as it can go before those imperfections starts to become too noticeable. Now, if we prepare to print, we see finished G-code. The colors here represent the movement speed, as you can see. We also see it would take 8 hours. It would take 110 grams of filament. Don't bother about the material cost. It is not correct at all. We use actually 36 meters of filament. So this will be quite a bit, actually. Now, if we go down layer by layer, we will see here the honeycomb structure that will be used on inside the print. While on the top, we'll go first one direction and then the other direction. It is a good idea to check the finished G-code to see if there are no openings or gaps or anything that could be a problem. Building the raft will first make a few passes in the same direction, and then one crosswise, and then go diagonal twice and thrice before it starts building the model. And we can see here the support structures that are used. And then we start building and building and building all the way up to the top. And so now it is only to save the two parts to my memory card and take it to a printer. Now that we have the model, it is time to print it out on the 3D printer. I have an E3D big box, so let's go ahead and take a look at the time lapse. The first attempt with the white PLA didn't turn out that great. I actually ran out of filament. But the second attempt with the black PLA turned out pretty decent. Welcome back. Now that this is printed, or rather not this one, but the one that I made in a black PLA, because this one is a prototype testing settings in Simplify 3D, which didn't really turn out that great for this one. And the second attempt with the white PLA failed because I ran out of filament. So the time lapse you saw was with the black filament, my third attempt, and I was pretty happy with it. Now, for this holder, I have, compared to Phil Behringer's at least, strengthened this bit quite a bit. I've also added teeth here on the top in order to make it grip better on the table surface. However, that will leave marks, so if you have a lacquered desk, so be careful about that. You can put a bit of rubber or something between, that will help a lot. Also, on the screw itself, I put a dome here in order for it to put a small point of contact to the desk itself, which meant it will use a greater force. I also put a shelf here for the wires. I didn't put in any kind of holes for the connectors of the headphone because my headphones are always connected to the computer, so I didn't need that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. This is my first video in 3D printing, and I'm hoping to make a lot more. Now, if you like what you see, please hit the like button and please subscribe. If you don't like anything of this film, hit the dislike button if you'd like, and leave a comment down below to tell me what I could do better. In any way, I hope to see you again. Take care.